We are Bragg, makers of the tried and true apple cider vinegar that you've had in your cabinet for as long as you've had a cabinet. And you trust that bottle sitting in your cabinet because we were in your mom's cabinet and her mom's cabinet. You use us as a wellness drink. Your mom used us in salad dressing. Her mom's mom used us as glass cleaner. And while there are many ways to use us, one thing is always the same, our recipe. It has never changed since we've been put in cabinets. Bragg, it's not weird if it works.
The first sentence of that story goes, I've got 38 aunts called Comfort and all of them are assholes. So, yes.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dawnie Walton.
And I'm Deesha Philyaw.
And this is the Ursa podcast, where we geek out on all things short fiction. On this podcast, we'll interview authors like today's illustrious guest, Nana Nkweti. We'll discuss collections and stories we love and shine a light on new writers and those who never got their due.
But we're not just talk, we're publishers too. Over at ursastory.com, we've created a new home for short fiction from some of today's most thrilling writers, as well as emerging voices, with stories you can read on your phone and audio stories that you can listen to right here in your favorite podcast app. We're doing all of this with support from you. Become an Ursa member today by subscribing in Apple Podcasts or by going to ursastory.com/join.
And like I mentioned today, we are talking to Nana Nkweti, the author of Walking on Cowrie Shells. Now, I'm going to give a little bio information on Nana, but then we're going to get real loose and tell a story about what happened when all three of us met up in Miami. Okay, so first of all, let me say, Nana, I love your Twitter bio. First of all, so I have to read that first. American, cultural carnivore, professor and professional pro slanger.
Say it with some basic slanger. I love it.
Slanger.
Yes. So now I'm gonna do the buttoned up version. Okay. Nana Nkweti is a Cameroonian American writer and AKO Kane Prize finalist whose work has garnered fellowships from MacDowell, Vermont Studio Center, UCross, and many, many others. Her first book, Walking on Cowrie Shells, was hailed by the New York Times, by Deesha Philyaw, in fact, as a raucous and thoroughly impressive debut with stories to get lost in again and again. Her work features elements of mystery, horror, myth, and graphic novels to showcase the complexity and vibrance of African diaspora cultures and identities. She's a professor of English at the University of Alabama, where she teaches creative writing courses that explore her eclectic literary interests. Nana, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Dawnie. Thank you, Deesha. I'm so appreciative to be here.
We are happy to be talking with you again after, as Dawnie said, our fun time meeting you in Miami.
So let's paint the picture, right?
Uh-oh.
It is.
I thought what happened in Miami stayed in Miami.
What had happened was
it's all love here. It's all love here. So it is late November. It is a precious window of time between when the Delta variant eases and Omicron came and put its foot on our necks, right? So that's where we're at. It is cold in New York City. It is cold in Pittsburgh. We are looking forward to some warmth, some heat, beaches. We get to Miami. We're excited to meet each other. It rains almost the entire damn time it rains, right? And so there's a big party that everyone's excited to go to. It's going to be at the, was it the Standard? The rooftop on the Standard. We all packed our cute clothes. We're excited. It's still raining. So it was me and you and Dontiel Moniz and Brian Broom, the Kirkus winner for Punch Me Up to the Gods. Mm-hmm. It was Shayla Seabury, the poet. It was Black excellence. Yes. It was incredible. And we are also excited because Nana Nkweti is coming, right? And
in the house.
We're crowded under, We are crowded under this awning, right? Because it is pouring outside and we're trying to stay dry. And Nana comes through with her family and they are dressed to the gods.
To the nines. I mean,
they are
faces beat.
So Nana sits with us. We're talking about all things lit world. We're kikiing, we're laughing, we're feeling like kings and queens because like this is our night. Nana's family has gone inside. They're getting their drinks. They're actually like having like a party, a good time. When they come back out, you know, Nana says, oh, you know, to her sister, can we take a picture? Can you take a group picture of us? And so we're huddled up and we're trying to get ourselves together and get our poses and everything. And she's taking the picture and changing the lighting and everything. And I think Nana, at some point you said something to your sister, you know, come on, and you're like, finish taking the picture. And your sister said, I'm sorry, I'm not used to hanging out with book nerds like y'all. And we fell out. We fell out. And
We
now
were
let
like
me
the
tell
cool
you,
kids, but then
she burst, listen, she
Bubbles
busted
were
that
burst.
bubble. She was like... And let me tell you, I fell in love with you then. I fell in love with your family because it was just, it felt so real and so warm. And I was like, I felt like I knew you a little bit more than any bio could say. So we are so happy to have you here.
First of all, Dawnie, let me say that the way you tell the story, I was like, what happened next? You had me riveted. And I was there. I was like, ooh. I'm like, ooh, no, they did not.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, now let's get into our little conversation. Your collection is absolutely stunning and so eclectic and had me laughing, had me thinking. I am just curious about the journey of this collection, you know, from writing it to finding the right publishing home for it, all of that good stuff.
Well, you know, the journeys are long and, you know, sometimes the road is rocky, but you have to do it. I mean, I think that the real journey is from Nana and Nkweti, age 9, writing little sci-fi / you know, Jane Austen mashups, you know. And that was very much my trajectory. It was like a blue stocking young woman who was just really introverted, and most of my besties were in books, and that I always knew that I was going to write stories. So that like, you know, fast forward many, many, many years and me finally privileging that writing self and allowing for myself to kind of put my voice in the world. That's the journey, right? You go to school, you're a good daughter of immigrants, so you're going to go to law school, you're going to get the safe job. But then finally making sure that my family was okay, that these very fancy folks you were talking about, you know, had all gone through school and were educated, and then finally going back and saying, hey, what about that book I've always wanted to write? What about that book that I have in me? It's my time now, you know?
That's really beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
And you kick off the collection with a lovely and very specific dedication to your parents. And so in what ways did your family contribute to the spirit and wisdom of this collection?
I mean, my family, as you know, as Donnie's anecdote, you know, reveal, we're incredibly close knit. We are they're very, very interested in the world. They've got ranges people, and it's just like being in that place where you had a family that allows for you to be all your multiple selves, to be Whitman-esque and contain those multitudes. It was wonderful. I grew up in a house with my father and my mother always having books around us. We always had a library, a space where, you know, that was kind of privileged. It was like a kind of like the holy of holies, you know. So I was reading books from a very young age that might have been way too inappropriate for my young, tender years. But, you know, I was like,
been there,
you know, but, you know, it was just a wonderful kind of like inculcation and introduction to reading and just reading books, you know, with literature with a capital L to, you know, my brother actually like read the encyclopedia from A to Z when he was young. So that's the kind of family I grew up in. We're just really privileged reading and that kind of space for the imagination. So yeah, that's my family, and my mom and my mamas and pops. I knew that that book was going to be dedicated to the very beginning, because I knew that like they were the blueprint for for that.
We are Bragg, makers of the tried and true apple cider vinegar that you've had in your cabinet for as long as you've had a cabinet. And you trust that bottle sitting in your cabinet because we were in your mom's cabinet and her mom's cabinet. You use us as a wellness drink. Your mom used us in salad dressing. Her mom's mom used us as glass cleaner. And while there are many ways to use us, one thing is always the same: our recipe. It has never changed since we've been put in cabinets. Bragg, it's not weird if it works.
I love talking about point of view. I mean, you and I both went to Iowa. We talk about point of view all the time. And I disagreed with a lot of our professors about what they had to say about point of view. But what I want to say is that I really enjoyed the stories in the collection that offered, if even for a paragraph or two, another voice or another perspective. I mean, I'm thinking about Night Becomes Us, where we get not only Zainab's perspective, but for that one short section, those couple paragraphs, the perspective of the teenage suicide bomber who kills her mother. Or in The Devil is a Liar, you're alternating between the perspectives of Temperance and Glory, her mother. How do you know when a story is calling for a dip into another point of view? Is that a decision that you make from the start, or is it something that evolves as you're writing?
I mean, I think it changes from story to story. I knew that in The Devil is a Liar, I was going to be telling these like dual perspectives, because this conversation and this relationship between the mother and daughter, Temperance and Glory, it was central to their narrative. Like, how would they navigate their generation gap and their kind of levels of spirituality and come to a place of understanding? So I knew I would kind of be moving between the two of them like a dance, with that suicide bomber, like telling Hanifa's perspective in Night Become Us. I was very much aware that I didn't want her to be vilified. I didn't want her to become a place like, either this tragic figure or like the person who was just like a kind of soulless killer. I wanted us to understand why she was in that space at that kind of climactic moment. So it just kind of intuitively, I just knew I had to kind of enter her space. And you are correct. Sometimes, those craft classes, they tell us, oh, we can't do that kind of head hopping. You can't switch POVs like mid, story like that. That's verboten. And there's all these kind of huge, do not enter signs around certain choices. And you just have to kind of go with your gut and take that kind of narrative leap and see if your readers can go with you. So I'm glad it landed for people, and that it didn't feel dissonant, and that people, kind of that space at that time allowed her humanity to be shown, even though she was soon gone from the page and from that world.
And, this idea of doing what you want to do, and the boldness, it just comes through the entire collection, and even in some non-text ways, right? So you have included illustrations, photos, and graphics in some of the stories, like Rain Check at Momocon and Schoolyard Cannibal, and then even the diary font in Dance the Fire Dance that breaks up the narrative there. How did these elements become part of the collection?
I was very aware. Honestly, one of the great thing about going through and doing this book later in life is that I had so much moxie. Like, I've always known that what I wanted to do and been very singular minded. But by the time, there are zero F's to give. By the time, you're like, you're grown, you're just like, and this is how we're going to do this, and you get to, you're used to honor your own choices, and you just want to have your say. I was like, if I'm going to be doing this book, I wanted to be gonzo. I wanted to do all the things that I needed to do on the page. I knew that, I can't be, especially like we're talking about moments of Fraxis and like the graphic novel. I'm doing a whole story at Comic-Con. Of course, there's going to be a graphic element. Of course, there's got to be a comic book page. If I could have a whole anime, technology does not exist, but one day if I could have video popping up from that book, I would have had the cartoon animation going. I knew I was going to do that. I knew that I was going, when I was looking at fonts and they sent me initial drafts and it didn't have that kind of humanist handwriting font, I was like, okay, no, we have to go back and do this and I just researched fonts because even in my early, non-production valued way, I was adding those elements and they were just integral to the understanding of the story, because that's what our world looks like. We're, all of our senses are stimulated. We see, we smell, we taste, we hear, so if I could add, have music lyrics in there and with references to music, references to food, and have those visuals, which are very much part of the graphic world and very much part of schoolyard canon, which is bannable, which is interrogating the use of images to make certain people feel small. I'm going to do that, So
you actually used a word that I have seen a lot, but I don't know what it means. What is ekphrasis, you said?
Yes. That's basically just having the use of more formally when people were going to, let's say you're going to a museum and you're writing a poem in response to a piece that you see, and then maybe that moment you're literally kind of doing a 1-to-1 ratio representation of that particular art form, but now in narrative form, right? But for this, I'm just referencing any moment where the image often came first, right? Any moment where I'm where my text is in conversation with visual elements. So yeah,
I love that, and I also find that I'm doing that as well when I'm writing. If I'm when I was researching Opal and Nev, looking at photography that really inspired things that happen, and there's a sort of symbiosis between a song and an image and all of that. And this segues very well into my next question, which, there's a lot of playfulness in your work with form, with humor, and with the pop culture references, which I love. And so I always love when I feel like the writer is having fun on the page. And I wondered, which story did you have the most fun writing? What, when you were sitting typing and you were sort of making yourself laugh or anything like that?
It's so interesting. So many people have referred to the humor in all of the pieces, even in the most dark and kind of they said, somebody was saying I go from the comedic to profound. I don't realize that because that's who I am naturally. I've got a kind of dry, snarky humor, and I come from a family that loves to laugh. So once again, that idea of containing the multitudes, if I want the narratives to reflect all the kind of, facets of the human condition, humor is one of them, right? So sexy times is one of them. So there's sexy moments and there's fun moments and there's moments of horror and pain and pathos. I just want that full, evolution or that full movement through all those type of ranges and registers of expression. So making me laugh out loud, I would say, I don't want to say her name because she who shall not be named in It Takes a Village to Come some say their girl, the protagonist in that, she was just she has so much moxie. I say that she's got the disposition of an Uzi because she comes there not unapologetic. She's and you best believe, that's her energy. She's got that kind of rah girl energy that, you're just wow. Are we doing that out here? Really? And so I would say she had me in shock, do a couple of shock chuckles, every once in a while, So it's only afterwards really that I realized that sometimes that humor comes through, but because it's so natural to who I am as a writer, I'm not always thinking it when I'm doing it, but somebody will tell me, oh, that had me laugh out loud. And I was oh, okay, I can see that,
And actually, It Takes a Village, some say, was one of my favorites in the collection. I mean, I loved every single story, but if I had to choose some favorites, that was definitely one of mine. It's satirical. I am a sucker for satire. And as I noted in my review in the Times, this particular story is set against the backdrop of social media celebrity culture. And we witness this unlikely collision of findom, which is financial domination kink for you vanilla folks out there. And
I have to say, I must be vanilla because I did not. I was I'm learning something today. Okay.
Don't ask me how I know. And so
tell it. So
Is this that kind of podcast?
So yes, it is. It is. We go there. We go there. So you pull together Findom and the murky business of international adoption.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my favorite lines is when the white adoptive mother of this Cameroonian child observes, people think Bono and Bill Gates are supporting the continent. They have no idea it's us. Listen, the way I cackled, I could hear that white woman saying that line. Like, and that's the thing about like so much. We were talking about this in our last episode. Like in these days, satire, runs real close, and speculative fiction, because the world and the state that it is, it just feels kind of real sometimes. It feels a lot, very realistic. You're like, yeah, this is satire, but it's real close. And I just love how throughout the collection, there are moments where you bring irreverence and nuance to some sensitive subjects, including the tensions between Africans and Black Americans, as you do, for example, in Dance to Fire Dance. You also take that up again with a lot of tenderness in Schoolyard Cannibal, where we meet a Black girl of Cameroonian descent who is mistreated by her Black American peers. And as I was reading, I was like, ooh, this story can go a lot of different directions. What were some of your considerations as you were crafting Schoolyard Cannibal?
I would say, first of all, thank you for your comment on the satire, because I feel like, we are living in this dystopian moment, and everything is just, truth is way stranger than fiction these days. Very much so. And for Schoolyard Cannibal, I think, and with all my stories, it was incredibly important for me that, I just present stories and human beings in moments that feel as authentic as possible, that feel like real human beings, real concerns written on the page, right? And that story, it almost didn't make it in the book because it was something that was very tender to me. It was a story I came and made my way to only after reading, Claudia Rankine's Citizen, and having that kind of language and understanding the idea of of how to kind of tell tales of microaggression, tell tales of feeling lack, in a society. And I almost didn't put it in there because I did not want it to be a space of perpetuating tensions between Africans and African Americans. I didn't want people to say, and just be and not see other perspectives. So when I'm writing those perspectives, as you can see, I kind of go between trying to understand, why are those tensions there? I'm writing into them and depicting them. I did not make them. I did not invent them. They're things that I've seen in my life growing up, moments where, African identity was very much, not popular. Nobody wanted to be African. White folks didn't want to be African, Chinese, and nobody wanted to be African. So, but that's that's the kind of the story of, unfortunately, Black identity kind of writ large, right? Nobody wants the struggle and the pain. They only want when your things are on and popping and flossy, right? So, I did not want that to be out there. I honestly, at one point, I literally said this. I was like, to my white editor, I was like, I don't know if I want white folks to see this. I don't want people doing our business.
It's our dirty laundry.
Doing our dirty laundry.
Yeah.
I don't know if I want them up in our business like this. I want this to be something that, but I did want it to be something that sparked conversations. And if somebody can have a conversation and kind of bridge that gap, then let it be doing that kind of work out in the world, so that the next time you say something out of pocket to somebody about somebody who has a different, heritage from you, you're just like, oh, why am I really saying this? Let's interrogate that. Have we now been pitted against each other with these kind of false dichotomies that don't really exist? You think, okay, African Americans have it easy because they've had this, and you're feeling, or that Africans have it easy because they have this. I'm just like, who's really running the things, and what is gained from us being in kind of opposition like that. So that was why I ended up writing
benefits? It ain't us.
It does not. It does not benefit us. So I'm like, I literally grew up in that space, right? I grew up I grew up in Southeast DC, and all my teachers were Black. So everybody was African American. And then I go to Cameroon, West Africa, and that's the rest of my high school years spent there. So those Black spaces very much inform who I am as a person. My identity is people who raised me up from those two cultures. So every time I saw that kind of dissonance and that level of kind of pushing against each other. I was just like, but I am because you guys are. So I never wanted that to be our portion, so.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, that was incredible. And it made me also think about, Deesha, you mentioned this story as well as part of that question, Dance the Fire Dance, where you have the heroine who is, and correct me if I say this wrong, called Akata. Yes, is that, did I say it correctly?
You would put a little twang in it like you did before. Akata. She's Akata.
Akata. Which, can you explain what that is to the reader, to the listeners?
Yes. So she's African, so her father is from Brooklyn, New York. He's African American. And then her mother is from Cameroon, West Africa. And Akata is, a nickname for African Americans. And that, I've seen that through West Africa. So I used to think, as everybody thinks is one thing, like those slangs only come from their culture. But it was initially, I believe it was kind of neutral in its as an explanation. But then later on, I kept on hearing it so many times in words of derision, used with a little bit of the kind of those Akata. So it was one of those things where I always found myself having to do this kind of ambassadorial duties. Like, really now? Is that what we're doing? So... And that moment,
right.
When I'm having, Catherine speak about this is my background and you are here because my parent, Akatas did this for you to have a place in this country. That is something that those are conversations I've had. So,
Well, I fell out at this part because you treat the subject with a lot of tenderness, yes, but also humor in the collection. And there's a moment where the protagonist of the story is at this wedding and she's caught the eye of Philip, who I think is sort of an eligible bachelor, and he likes her very much. So he says to her, actually, my sister warned me about the dangers of American girls. His voice is whispery against the coil of my ear. He pulls me close. Did she now? I smile at him over my shoulder as I settle into him. I may be only half American, but I rub that half against him for all I'm worth. I said, okay, girl. Okay.
Yes.
I love
that was a moment. I love that.
So y'all like the sexy times, with your findom knowledge that came out of nowhere.
Yes. Listen, I'm telling on myself today. Ain't no shame.
We love the sexiness. We love the juiciness. We love it all.
And once again, just part of the human existence and condition. Everything. I wanted everything to be in there. I wanted it to feel tender. I wanted it to feel raw. I wanted it to feel sexy when it needs to be sexy, or I want it to be satirical when it needs to be satirical. All just just to kind of show the fullness of these characters.
And for the collection as a whole, looking back, what do you wish you could go back and say to pre-publication Nana about the process?
Oh my goodness, it's gonna be all right. So a rap song over here. I think that you feel it feels like a Herculean task just kind of getting a book to, just to an agent and then to an editor and a publish, house that really gets behind your work. And then after that, there's a whole long period of editing and you don't even know when it's going to, when are you going to actually launch this book into the world? But once it's there, it's just like that mother who feels like she's been pregnant, for 22 months. It's only been, you're just like, oh, thank you. It's going to be okay. And once you do it, especially because I'm a debut author, once you've done it, it just makes you feel like nothing is insurmountable. I can do this again and again and again. And I look forward to that process. So
that's awesome. How does a story typically start for you?
Oh, I'm very, very voice driven. So I call it almost being possessed or having somebody come and say, whisper in your ear and tell you the juiciest tale. And you kind of have to follow them because they're kind of walking off into the night. And you're just I don't know where they're taking me. That dark alley looks scary, but I want to hear the rest of this story. And that's what happens. I'm very voice driven. So these characters come to me, even my first paragraphs are pretty much, they go unchanged because once I get that voice in my head, it's almost like they just immediately just sitting next to me and, and met at the smoky bar and they're walking me down the street and, we're going to have our time together. And they're just okay. And the moral of the story, and then they're just bye. And then it's interesting. So that's how it happens. I'm very, very voice driven.
That sounds thrilling. to be like led down or led into some cool place, or I love it. And then in terms of revision, how quickly do you sort of write your first draft, and then how many revisions do you typically do?
So it's interesting because my stories ended up going through the more formal review process, because like some of these stories were written for Iowa and written for a workshop environment. So you'd end up like at least getting one revision kind of cycle done with like people who were very interested in kind of like, helping you grow as a writer. So the stories that I wrote outside of the workshop process, like, I would say like I would do like one or maybe two, versions of them. But like the voices, very much stay the same. The first paragraphs very much stay the same. I think what happens often, like when you get to an editor and what have you, they have you do this kind of, yes, sometimes you kill darlings, but often they're just asking me to kind of linger and stay in a moment and kind of like expand on a moment, a scene. Like, so that whole Findom section that you loved, Deesha, it was not there initially, it was, I was actually like, like there's, I think a previous incarnation of this story was like published, and it was like that version had, we just went from her talking about like, feeling like she was not being seen in her American high school. And she, next thing we hear about her, that she's done certain things to get money. Like, she's done her like the, comely cleaners, like the worked, I think the semi-topless, semi-nude, cleaning service to get money. But I really like went back, at the advice of my editor, and just kind of sat in that moment and like watched her process, like watch her kind of empire building, to kind of get to her version of the American dream, because she's just like, by any means necessary, I'm going to be who I was meant to be. If America is transactional in this way, I'm going to figure out how to game this system and not get played by it. So that I just spent more time expanding upon something that I might have just kind of mentioned in the first incarnation. So.
And I actually have a follow-up question to something you said. Question for any listeners out there who are readers but maybe not writers. What is the difference between a story developed in workshop environment versus outside of it in your mind?
It's interesting. I know there's a lot of kind of discussion about MFA or NYC, people who are kind of like issuing like, workshop spaces and, worried about that they kind of have like a kind of flattening effect and that writers won't get to be themselves. But I never experienced that, once again, like I said, because by the time I was like, really privileging my writing, I was pretty sure that I had a voice, I knew what I wanted to say. And like, and you learn that like not everybody's necessarily going to be your ideal reader. Even that ideal reader might not be that person who's saying they love everything, so that ideal reader that you want is that person who loves things and they see possibilities and help you get where you need to go in terms of expanding as a writer and growing as a writer. So I felt very fortunate being in that kind of workshop experience. My stories that were done out of the side of workshop experience, I think that my main problem was like this idea of being, like I said, I'm like a good immigrant daughter. I have way too much like perfectionist tendencies. So sometimes I have to get out of my own way and allow things, let them go and not say, oh, I'm just going to revise this again, or like, put it out into the world. I think that being in those kind of spaces, that privileged literature, it just makes you, just do things faster, just like, okay, because other people have given you that cosign and that DAP, and you're just like, okay, I don't have to be afraid. Let me just go ahead and put this out in the world. You see your colleagues around you doing that, your peers around you doing that. They read your work, and you're just like, okay, this is doable. It makes the whole process feel like feasible, demystifies it,
I also have a process question for you. How do you know when a story is finished?
Oh, so this is going to sound so weird because like I said, like, my stories, like those stories where they're very voice driven, and like, I feel like it's like they're like summer love, it's like it's telling somebody like, how do you know that fling is over? It's like, how do you know? It's just, I feel like you have that wonderful time and that like that, there's that it was a season, right? So that's typically what happens to me. Like, I feel like my characters tell me that, they literally go end scene and like, they tell me all they have to tell me. And not some people don't agree because some people, be like, oh no, this could be a whole novel. And I know in my gut, no, it couldn't. We were done. That character has told me what they wanted me to tell me about their life. And then like, and then you just say farewell and it's like, feels bittersweet. And like, you love being in that world. You love being in that space. You loved hearing them talk. But once they're done telling you their story, they're done, And I think some people could benefit from that. Novelists.
Ooh, the shade.
Shade.
Oh, I'm sweating over here.
But you know how it is. Sometimes, it's like I feel like there's a compactness. Sometimes people go like they're going on longer than they, when the party is done and like everybody else is left and going home and you ready to take your shoes off and they still hanging around trying to have that's not that's just a joke. I say I feel like that's one of the benefits. Like for me, I've just intrinsically and instinctively known like okay like. When my characters are done with me, they're done with me. Like, I don't feel like I have to kind of to keep things going artificially, So
yeah, I could use some of that. Like I need a little bit more.
Oh
of
my
that,
God, Dawnie, are you feeling?
No, I do.
Do not. I was not even talking about you. I'm just making fun.
No. But see, I feel like I felt a little indicted, but no, I'm kidding. No, but it's true. Like when you're saying that you have a gut instinct for when the party is over, I don't really. Like I keep and I love short fiction, and one of the reasons why I love short fiction is because I find it very difficult to write short fiction because I don't know when the end is. And I often keep stuffing the world full of things and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger instead of kind of, at a manageable scale where it can end. I just keep opening new doors and threads. And so I greatly admire the stories in this collection. And like, I feel very satisfied when I reach the end of each one. And I think that has to do with your gut feeling for when the party is over. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I'm so, honestly, I feel like that's a wonderful thing to say because I feel like, I appreciate that, like, where I landed allowed people to feel like something is expanded. They've gained something, even if they don't have all the answers. I mean, I feel like that reflects life, right? Like, I feel like we get to the end of a character's story. It's a short time with them and they might not have everything figured out, but you can see they're a nod in that direction or there's something that feels like, there's a sense of closure for you. And that's all I want for readers to gain when they read.
I thought maybe we could let's do a little bit of an inspirational moment and do a flashback to your first ever short fiction publication. I mean, I think we all write for a while before we even think about sending our work out and think about where we're going to place it. But, just tell us the year and the publication and what the story was and what it was like to find out that it was going to be published.
Oh, this is a very what had happened was, So let me do some caveats, right? So there's the first time that my work was published, and then there's the first time where I was actually paid for my work being published. That felt like, oh, I have arrived. I'm grown now. I'm a grown writer. I'm out here in these publishing streets. And I felt like, and that was with, the Baffler, It Takes a Village, some say, where I got a check, I got some, spending some pocket money, and I felt like I'm a professional, and that was just as recently as 2019. And I will say this about me too, as well. Like, some of these stories were done at various moments in my life. I have stories that didn't make it to this collection, but were finished earlier. But when I felt like I was actually now starting to submit work and then getting a paycheck for work and feeling, okay, this is something that's I can make a life around. That was the first time, and that story is it takes a village. Some say that that was the like the capstone, like the opening story of my book, and was a finalist for the 2019 Cane Prize. So I feel like it stood me in good stead in terms of making me feel like I'm grown now and I can honor my writing.
And so what is it, writing that story and the success of that story that sparked the idea to develop a collection?
So there's some other stories that came before that, right? But it was that one was the one that it was interesting. Like, as like this is what happens. Like you have other stories that go out in the world. Like I had another story that was published, but it was published in-house by like our school journal. And it's like, it doesn't really feel like you got that cosign from the world, like the publishing world at large, or from like you feel you're still kind of finding your bearings. But like this one, was, the story that made me feel like, okay, I should go ahead and like, honor all these other stories that have come before that I feel like are ready to be part of a collection. It very much so like set me on my way. So, yeah.
Like, can you talk us through the process of getting an agent, getting the deal, and that sort of thing?
Oh, yeah. Like, so as Dawnie knows, Iowa is interesting for that because they actually have these agents kind of like, I don't know, where they're flying in on some special like kind of Avengers jet or something like, I don't know. But they fly in and come talk to us. And it's not until like I started teaching at MFA programs that I realized that it's such a privilege because they'll have agent talks with us and they'll spend time just like, do a whole day where they're just trying to find the next big thing, It's a weird kind of bittersweet thing because there's like, the poets are there looking at you like, oh, where are our agents? And it's like, oh, crap.
Yeah.
And then you're also looking at like, you have a bad agent, you don't necessarily have to feel your power yet. So you're just like kind of, oh, I hope they like me. And you don't know that you're not supposed, that's not where you're supposed to coming from that place yet. So, but my agent came to Iowa. And one of the reasons why I said I went with that, my agent was because I was interested in having an agent that would allow me to, this agent, they're headquartered in LA. And I felt like, okay, they would allow me now to kind of like spread my wings and not be like, oh, we don't do television writing. We poo-poo that, because I was just like, oh, what if I want to get into a graphic novels, if I want to do this? I just wanted to be with people who allowed me that kind of breadth of expression, right? And also, he was the only person who talked about money. And while other people were clutching their pearls and just like, well, I never. It's just, we're all about the art, I was like, I'm a practical African girl. I want to know how I'm about to pay my bills. What does this whole industry look like? How do you kind of sustain, like, practically a writing career? So he talked about money. Mm-hmm. He talked about the writing industry being overwhelmingly white. So he was very real talk, and I was here for it. So that was why I chose my agent. And then I ended up like, choosing my publisher because, he wrote me this wonderful love letter to my book. And he had a vision for the book. And I was just like, so now when I had my book went to auction and there were other agents who were interested. I was like, where's that love letter though? Where's that love letter? Honestly, I literally did this. Like, like people, there was another, that they offered me way more money. And I was just like, but where's that vision though? Where's that vision statement? I need to kind of understand, like, because it was more important for me. The money is wonderful, but I feel that can come like, but like if I didn't honor the artistry, if I didn't honor and work with somebody who had a kind of a vision, a way of thinking, a real love to the book for the book and knew what I was trying to do and allowed me to kind of even grow even within that kind of like editorial space, then what was the point? What have I been doing all this for? Why did I leave my job in Brooklyn to move to Iowa? I didn't never, like what are those choices I was making were so that I could honor the creation of this art form. And like, as much as I love my agent talking about money, I was just like, sometimes you have to put that practicality inside and say like, hey, it's very important for me that, that all of this kind of sacrifice and this whole journey that little 9-year-old me has made till now is honored and that I'm working with somebody who does so. And that was what I got from my Steve Woodward at Grey Wolf. He just got it. I was like, you never know, because you're just like, how is this Midwest guy gonna get like little African me? But he was just like, go more Gonzo. He was just so Deesha. He gave me that. He gave you Findom. He gave you he gave you the title for Rain Check at MomoCon. He was like, that whole section was like, I just went into I went blurty, even blurtier, because sometimes like my problem is like or not even a problem, but like things that I'm interested in, I'm very interested in them. I'm geeky, I'm nerdy. So, but I'm just like, oh, nobody wants to hear me rant about like, Black X-Men and, but he's like, do that, girl. Do it, go in. He's like, go in, go ham. So now all of a sudden I'm adding, all the stuff that I thought I had gone Gonzo before because, but I had gone to a certain point. I was just like, let me just let the layperson enjoy this. But I was like, now I'm making all these Marvel references and now like, I'm going Hadouken, the energy burst, stuff that's very much part of my own very black nerd blurtiness. But I wasn't like, I wasn't necessarily privileging all that, but he was like, go hard or go home. And I was like, okay, you doing this.
I love it. That's so important to have a team behind you who just wants you to be the most you that you can possibly be.
Absolutely.
And I think too that, like, I love the way that you talk about, you know, finding your agent, because I think in publishing, the relationship between the writer and the publishing industry is so skewed, and writers often forget that your agent works for you.
Oh, listen, we need to do a whole show on that. Like, I know it's not unique to short story writers, but I mean, that would be a public service. But anyway, don't get me started.
That is, it really was a benefit and a privilege of, you know, being at Iowa and have the agents and sometimes a couple editors come to meet with you, because it level sets that expectation of what you need to be looking for professionally. So yes, I'm glad y'all talked about money. I'm glad that your editor had you putting in, you know, all that stuff that you were maybe like a little hesitant to do, but was truly reflective of the direction that you wanted to go. Yeah.
Very much so. I was, I was just fortunate because and it's something that I pass on. You're talking about like, doing a whole business stuff. I do all these business of writing conversations with my students every single time I can, because I feel like all that stuff is cloaked in mystery, and, people are just so happy to be here. You're just like, if I can do like some wizard, like, opening behind the curtain, you can see, okay, this is not so scary. This is how things work. This is what makes this industry tick. I'm going to do that,
What's your favorite story collection or collections that you've loved recently?
So it's interesting, right? I'm only now getting a chance to start reading for pleasure again. I was just like, oh, Lord. Like, especially like, working on my own book and, trying to like, you birth that book baby, and that's a whole thing. You know how that is, Dawnie. It was like that whole year, it was like a lost year. It was just like, it was just like all I was doing was teaching and editing, and then teaching and launch and touring, So I'm only now like, getting back to just reading for pleasure and everything. So I know this is going to seem like fan service, but I'm totally reading Deesha's book right now. So I know I'm behind the eight.
Thank you.
I am so behind the eight ball, but it is what it is. Like I literally when you're in the middle of doing your own book, you're like, okay, nothing else can, you're in that space. And then COVID,
right?
You're in the middle of a global pandemic. You're just trying to live. So it's just like, I'm really now like just enjoying and relishing, like just reading again. But, if you want to go back into the archives, we're talking Octavia Butler's Bloodchild, we're talking ZZ Packer's Drinking Coffee Elsewhere. We're talking, Diaz's Drown. Yes. Like, and then I have like all my people, like when I think about like somebody who like maybe go like, oh, can we do that? Is that really it is? Like my little feminist spidey senses were just tingling when I first read James Tiptree Jr., aka, Alice Sheldon, aka Raccoona Sheldon, who was in her life a spy, an artist, lived all the lives, and then wrote all these stories, and was universally thought to be a man for many, many years, and was having like long correspondence relationships with several of her speculative fiction counterparts of the day. And people were just like, oh, wow, what a robust masculine voice he has. And it was a woman all the time, So
wow. Because we can do anything.
Yes, we can. Exactly. Tell it. Come on. Somebody needs that word today. On today, let's take it to church. Somebody needs that word. That word on today. On today, somebody needs to understand that. But she really kind of like interrogated the idea ideas of gender, and just like wrote from this very interestingly people now can see like it really kind of like skewering like toxic masculinity, which is deliciously done, while writing beautiful sentences and writing very interesting kind of like futurescapes. So yes, I'm here for all that.
So speaking of beautiful sentences, what's the best sentence you think you've ever written?
So I'm going to tell you like the best sentence that, that I've ever written is always going to be the last sentence I wrote, because I'm always very, I'm like a perpetual motion machine. I want to keep moving forward and writing more and more interesting things on the page. So I don't want to rest on my laurels and just like, 10 years ago, that sentence, was so wonderful. And just like, I'll never top that. I don't feel that, so I want to stay in the now. So I'm working on a story called All the Comforts of Home. And the last sentence, the first sentence of that story goes, I've got 38 aunts called Comfort and all of them are assholes. So, yes.
Right, because that's an African naming tradition. Like I remember the first time I met someone named Innocence.
Yep.
So comfort. So say that sentence again. Now that we know comfort is a name, go ahead.
Yep. I've got 38 aunts called Comfort, and all of them are assholes. So,
oh my gosh.
I cannot wait to read that.
Yes.
So let's do a little bit of fill in the blank. The hardest part of writing a short story is
starting.
Amen. Ashe.
I want to say my favorite part is also starting, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because it's all about getting your butt in the seat, right? Like not just musing about it, not about just thinking about it, or not just like, you know, being writing adjacent, you know, like I've been writing adjacent too many times, you know, like, oh, like, you know, you started that first paragraph and then you just like, you let that go for like a month, you know, but when, you know, so, but like, is the story really starting? Is it really cooking with gas? Yes. And I feel like with all the comforts of home, like she's got me and I'm hooked and I'm writing and like it's like that's my favorite part as well. Like when I really hear that voice in my head, it's like a clarion bell. It's like magical, like, you know, it's that cotton candy, sweet summer love. It's good. It's all good. So, and that's where I am right now with that story. So it's starting and starting. So and really starting, you know.
Right.
Do you have any writing rituals? And also, what's the setup in your writing space? What does it look like?
Yeah, it's interesting because like when I think about my writing practice, right, it involves like living, right? So I think the ritual of living and being interested and engaged in the world is part of that ritual, is like the part of the process, right? Like I feel like my whole life I spend out there foraging for my fiction, right? You know, so it's just like I keep running lists of interesting, you know, character names and idiomatic expressions and weird factoids that I come across in the wild, you know, and I you know, I don't know when it's going to be used, but I know at some point it'll make its way into my work. So that's very much part of my kind of like overall writing practice and writing rituals. And as far as my actual, like when I'm actually on that page with like, you know, a story like, you know, with the 38 aunts named Comfort, I can't say that I'm very fussy. Like, you know, it just involves me sitting down, you know, like it changes sometimes. Like I had one particular story which had a strong hip hop beat to it, you know, so I would play hip hop music to kind of stay in that kind of rhythm and that kind of musicality. But it changes from story to story, you know, like a story like The Devil is a Liar, right? Did I listen to, you know, gospel music at one point? Yes. Did I do that every time? No. So it would change depending on like the needs of that, you know, what would get me in that space that day. And in terms of my writing setup, like, you know, I've got, it's a mixture. Like I've got like a bronze sculpture of a Cameroonian woman. She's like bare breasted with a Harvard basket on her back, but I got her decked out in pearls looking flossy. So it's like, you know, so like this kind of, it like speaks to my themes. Like, you know, I love to see women like, you know, that intersectional identity of Black womanhood. So she's flossy but hardworking and like, you know, and native in that kind of way. And I've got like little hip hop affirmations like every day I'm hustling and I'm bossy, you know. And then I also have like, you know, like in this place of honor, I've got an image of my grandmother, Paulina Loe Nana. They called her big, and she was big in personality, big in stature, and she's just like had this huge dynastic clan, but she had to dream big, you know, very early on, and put my mother in school at a time when, you know, education was not universal. It was not like accessible to young girls. And that kind of foresight and that vision and her, you know, the kind of joyousness she had in life and the kind of, you know, foresight to make sure that all her girl children were educated, because she had like mainly girl children, and people were saying, oh, that's so sad, you know. That actually, you know, is why I'm here today. So she's there and she looks at me and she smiles. So.
Nana, thank you so much. Just, you know, for this generous conversation. Fun, so much fun talking with you. It's like part 2 of Miami, but virtual. And thank you for your collection, which is fun to read, but it's also so bold. And that's just really inspiring to me as a writer. And it was just such a delight to read. So thank you so much.
Deesha, Dawnie, thank you so much for having me on this platform. You guys are amazing, conversations partners, and I really felt incredibly at home and thankful to talk to with two authors who are making this amazing space for literature in the world and also putting out great literature in the world themselves. I appreciate this.
Oh,
thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. And we will get together again, whether in Miami or some other place.
Amen to that. I'll be there for Miami 2.0,
Well, friends, we've reached the end of Ursa Season 1. This has been a wonderful experience. We've learned so much about some amazing writers and stories, the craft of writing and storytelling, and about living a creative life. It's been inspiring and thrilling, and even more so to hear from everybody who's joined us on this journey.
We are so thankful for all of your support for this show. We'll be back very soon, and we're so excited to keep going with more stories and conversations in Season 2 and beyond.
As always, if you'd like to support our work, become an Ursa member by going to ursastory.com/join. You'll help us keep producing this show and doing it on our terms. Until next time.